Now, to pay or not to pay, that's the question that parents have been asking for years about their children's education. Do kids turn out better if they go to expensive private schools? Is the public system now collapsed and of no worth to your children? David Gillespie is a writer who sparked the debate about the health effects of sugar in his new book. He's looking at schooling, and he's with us now. David Gillespie, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Virginia.
And I suppose you have a very personal interest in this because you're a father of 6.
6, yes. So a very personal interest in it, and the kind of money I would be looking at to send them to private school is astronomical, well over $1 million.
Yes, you did the sums. It added up to 1.3, and you thought, well, I can't do that. Although you're a lawyer by trade, I mean, they earn a fair bit of money, and a great deal of lawyers do send.
They do tend to earn a bit of money, but they don't earn that kind of money.
Well, if I can generalise, I guess as people climb higher up through the white-collar worker ranks, the aspiration is to send your child to as best school as possible. And I believe that you were educated in the private system.
Definitely. Look, I was educated in one of the best independent schools in Brisbane, I guess the equivalent of Shaw in Sydney. Yeah, I definitely received the best education money could buy, but my kids are all going to and have gone to public schools. Now,
tell us why. How did you make this analysis and what did you base it on?
The only thing I can base it on as a lawyer, which is the evidence. I'm not an education expert any more than I'm a nutrition expert. My only expertise is in analysing evidence. And so I brought that skill to bear, which is pull aside the spin, pull aside the marketing that we're given by unions, by schools, by governments, and see what the evidence says. And there is an abundance of evidence on education. I mean, education is a very high priority thing for researchers to look into, both in the United States here and in the UK. And so there is an abundance of evidence. And what I did was go through that evidence and say, let's look at it as a whole. What does it tell a parent about what really matters in schooling and what doesn't matter?
And when you say the evidence, are you talking about outcomes? Is that the main evidence when wanting to look at and comparing the different elements of the education system in Australia?
Yes. So the vast majority of studies in education are focused on academic outcomes, but that doesn't mean that there aren't studies focused on other outcomes. And I look at those studies as well because at the end of the day, we're all average by definition. And academic outcomes are certainly important, but there's also a lot more than that to schooling. So
right.
I was looking not only...
Well, I just want to jump in there and say there's an assumption there that the outcomes that we're getting, that those figures, that they're reliable. You believe they are reliable?
Look, I think they are reliable. There's very good standardised testing now available across Australia. I mean, whatever you might think of NAPLAN, it does provide standardised testing. And there's very good and very reliable international testing available, comparing Australia to other countries. And that's been available at least since 2000 in the PISA system and since well before that in the TIMS system, which measures maths and science.
All right, so looking at those outcomes then, what did you find? Did you find that you could actually generalise and say that most, let's stick with the secondary system, that most public high schools are as good or will give you as good an education as the majority of the privately funded independent system schools?
No, I don't think you can say that. I think what you can say is that you will get very good outcomes in both systems. As to whether it's most in both systems, you can't say that. There's statistics, for example, that show that 40% of Victorian public high schools perform above the median for private schools in Victoria, and 28% of private schools in Victoria perform below the median for public schools in Victoria. So those are the kind of numbers we're talking about. And what that tells us is that there are good and bad in both systems. And what my aim was to identify what are the factors, what are the things that a parent needs to know in order to decide whether the school they are looking at sending their child to is on the good side of the fence or the bad side of the fence.
And what are those factors?
So the clearest and most definitive factor is the school principal, the leadership of the school. Just like in any business or any area of human endeavour, the the leader really, really matters. And in a school, it matters an enormous amount, because the leader infuses a culture that can either generate effective teaching and effective teachers or not. And so the leader is the critical component in any school, the principal in the school.
And the quality of the teachers?
Yeah, obviously the quality of the teachers, but high quality teachers can't overcome poor leadership. You can have high quality teachers in a very bad system, and what I mean by a very bad system is a leader that says either that teachers are professionals and should be left alone in their classroom to do whatever they wish to do. That's a bad system. Or a leader that says teachers need to be managed closely every minute of every day. It's a system that I can slot anyone into. I can pull someone off the street and put them in there. That's also a bad system. What you need is a leader that infuses a collegial attitude, a culture of mentorship and of continuous monitoring of both student and teacher performance in the school. Now that's very, very difficult to do within the rules that are set forth in many of the public education systems in the states in Australia, but good leaders do it anyway.
It's interesting to also look at what you find doesn't matter so much in a school that can give your child a good education outcome. For example, you say class sizes don't matter as much as some people think. Composite classes are not too bad a thing either. Can you talk to us about those two issues?
Sure. So class sizes has been a huge issue in the Australian education system, driven largely by union campaigns since the 1960s. It has massively increased the cost of the Australian education system. In real terms, so after adjusting for inflation, we pay 5 times as much to educate a child now as we did in 1964. And the primary driver of that cost increase has been a massive reduction in class sizes. So average class sizes have gone from the high 40s to the low 20s in that time frame. But the reality is that the evidence on class sizes tells us internationally that it doesn't make any difference to performance. There have been some very, very expensive experiments in this, notably in the United States, where they have actually reduced class sizes significantly within large systems like the LA school districts or the Florida systems. It's cost them an absolute fortune, and the studies that have run alongside those reductions have shown that there is no improvement whatsoever attributable to those class size reductions. So whilst we're continuously told by unions and by schools that class size reductions are important for educational outcomes, the reality is the evidence says it's rubbish. And the people who are thrashing us in international comparative tests, the school systems that are beating us, uniformly have higher class sizes than we do.
And similarly then for composite classes, that they're not as bad as,
so
as the legend would seem to suggest.
Well, every parent worries about composite classes because they worry that, well, if my child's the year 2 in a 2-3 class, you know, are they potentially open to bullying, or are they going to be falling behind the class? And if they're the year 3 in a 2-3 class, are they being held back by the year 2s? The reality is that there have been very, very thorough studies on this, once again out of the LA school system, where they have terribly good statistics on this stuff, where they've tried every possible combination throughout their entire data set, and the result is absolutely clear. There is no difference. It does not affect performance of children either in the low end or the high end of the composite class, and parents should not worry a bit about it.
But David Gillespie, we also know from figures that I read only recently that more and more Australians in just the general suburbs of the major cities are sending their children to private schools rather than the local state school. That in itself surely must be driving down the quality of the education that those who do go to the state school will get there. Is there any way of addressing that by making the decision to sending your child to a state school?
The reality is that in Australia there's no such thing as a non-government school. All of the sectors of schools in Australia are approximately funded equally. So it costs the government $10,000 to send a student to a state school, and it costs the government about the same to send them to a Catholic school or an independent school. It's just that 2 of those systems get to charge fees as well. The interesting thing is that those 2 systems that are charging fees as well are still paying teachers about the same. And remember that teaching is the primary cost in our education system, are still paying teachers about the same as they are in the state schools. There isn't a lot of difference. And there isn't a lot of difference in the capabilities of the people teaching in those systems. So what we're being fed is a lot of marketing spin. school systems are competing with each other to get the very best student into their system so that they can then market that they had something to do with that result, when the only thing that they had to do with that result is getting those students into their system. The result for the system, though, is that the entire system starts to degrade. Once you start streaming people apart into the three streams in any system, whether it's within a school or across the entire school system, streaming is destructive of equity. Once you lower the equity in a school system, you start to reduce the results of the system as a whole. A falling tide lowers all boats, if you want.
Yes.
And that's what we're seeing in Australia. Over the last 15 years, Australia's performance has slid backwards inexorably. We were once one of the top performing systems in the world, and we're steadily going towards the average.